All right, let me bring up the agenda and see if this, I've never used Google Meetings before, so hopefully my screen share works on Catalina here. How do you do it? Sorry.
It's at the lower right-hand corner. It should pop up as soon as you put your cursor down there.
All right. Be brave and share my whole screen. Oh, I have to restart my browser in order to share my screen. How about if you have sharing, maybe you just want to bring up the agenda and just click on those links. You can just browse through those.
Yes, sure thing.
That'd be great. I've got the 45 other tools all permissioned, but not this one. Okay, so so this first one, if you want to open that, I appreciate it. So at IBM, what we're trying to do is we've got our own certification process, and we're building a monster catalog for all of our products. So billions of dollars worth of products we're using OLM. So we're really getting involved in it. And so we're one of the challenges we've got is we want to be able to correctly define dependencies between all of the products. So we're trying to use Kubernetes the way it was designed to be used, and we're trying to use all of the operators that are designed to be used and so forth. And I'll talk about the channel taxonomy in the next one. But in this one, I think what happened is there was a mistake made to include the default channel in the bundle. And when you put the default channel in the bundle, the order in which the bundles are built now matter. So if you're going to have, so in our world, we're having a channel taxonomy that is not, so remember there's kind of two channel taxonomies from my point of view. There's like the continuous one, and there's one called like, I think the hybrid, not hybrid, continuous, and well, I call it SEMVer, or automatic Z build. So we're using the automatic Z build or SEMVer channel taxonomy. And so when we do that, we need a way when people are updating older streams to make sure the default channel doesn't change, keep flip-flopping over the time. So as you know, default channels are what's used today to automatically install subscriptions for dependent operators based on their GVK APIs. So all this feature is the ability to set the default channel on a package in a catalog at any time. So I'm looking for is a set default channel action on a catalog. We'll have to look at the database and so forth. And I was talking to Evan. You can see Evan and Kevin kind of weighed in here on this one.
So this is Kevin, by the way. I have a couple of thoughts and comments. The first one is that I think just to give everybody on the call just a little bit of context about like where we are or how we got to where we are. The reason why package level information is encoded currently in the bundles is more or less an aggregation that just exists for the purpose of, well, partially backwards compatibility, but also partially just as a ramping off point, right? Because the originally, before we had operator bundles at all, we had this package manifest format of the entire historical graph was encoded in a single directory, and you defined your graph, any package level information, the default channel, and any of the channels that you had, just all in one place. When we moved to bundles, we needed an onboarding ramp for basically CI pipelines to be able to ingest that information synchronously, like as part of just as part of pull requests and merges and things like that. I don't think we never really intended for that to be the only way you could ever define any of that package level information. It was just like, this is where we're starting so that we can get something working. I think our goal, and we've actually been having a whole bunch of discussions about this over the last couple of weeks, is to be able to define package level information or even index level information outside the context of the scope of a single bundle. So the part of the problem there is literally just that in order to make sure that we can reproduce an index, the first thought was, well, so just to get us to a place where we can reproduce an index, let's just do it by, here's the list of all the bundles in the order they were added to the index. If you need to rebuild the index because of data loss or what have you, just go and rerun that whole process over again. So right now we're in the process of figuring out what's a more robust way of rebuilding an index from scratch or backing up an index. And a lot of that has to do with trying to come up with a way of defining the index as like either a configuration file, or maybe we would just save the database itself plus some underlying configuration information. That's sort of implementation detail of the registry. So that's just to give you some context. That's sort of where we are right now. That being said, for this particular request, I think it's totally reasonable. I think adding something to OPM to define just the default channel on a given package, like that's definitely in the scope of what we want to do. I think we have some prerequisite steps we need to get there, but I think that's something that we're like actively looking at and actively going to probably work on sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that'd be great, because as soon as we come out with our next channel, we're broken. So right now we're all on V1 channels. We just published our catalog today. So we have our first 2 products that actually went live today with our catalog methodology using SEMVer channels, and of course using V1. So we're all good at the moment because there's only one. But as soon as we come up with our second channel, then we're going to be in trouble.
I'm curious, can you tell me why that's the case?
Well, as soon as we come out with a version 2 channel, or let's say a version 1.1 channel, and when we do a Z-build patch for version 1.0, that bundle, right? How do we know that bundle is they're being done in different Git build streams? So that's going to have to now know what the default channel for everybody is, right? And if we ever rebuild things from scratch, that you have to make sure we add them all in order. So in order to get that default channel set in all of the bundles the right way, you have to play them back exactly in the right order. And it has to build in all of our CI/CD processes. They have to know about this problem up front. They can't like bolt it on later. You know what I mean?
So yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that are sort of interesting there. The first one is, and maybe someone who is more knowledgeable about this particular part of the product can answer this question better for me, but I thought there was some level of control around the only so that we have this package level information that's encoded in the bundles. I had thought that we had added something around making it so that that package level information is only applied in certain cases. And I had thought that it was something around like either being the tip of the default channel or something related to like semantic versioning if you're using the SEMVer mode. And so we wouldn't overwrite the default channel if you're publishing an older version on an older content stream. So if something's not working there, maybe we should just go through like some specific use cases of what you guys are doing. I kind of feel like we
so
can
that
solve
makes
this problem outside the scope of like applying the package level information.
Yeah, so I don't know if Evan or Nick knows more about that, but we want to use the SEMVer skip patch mode, but OpenShift doesn't support that yet, and so we're not going to use that until that matures. And so we're still using the good old replaces mode, the default for OPM. And so that has ordering problems.
I see.
Yeah, all your brains, you guys are thinking about all the features and stuff that have been in there for months, but in reality, none of it's supported yet in OpenShift, so we have to wait.
When you say it's not available in OpenShift, do you mean in the OpenShift CI pipelines?
No,
Because OpenShift proper should have, right, like at a high level, right, like what you're doing when you build an index is you're just building a registry image. OpenShift should like respect that graph that's built regardless of.
Yeah, I know. So here's the problem. So I don't want to open up a can of worms here, but
Sure.
so OpenShift 4.4 ships a version of OPM and OPM catalogs, and there's a level of support agreement that's built based on OPM 1.5. So 4.4 has OPM 1.5 Red Hat images in it, right? So if you look in the Red Hat repo, of which they rebuilt all the upstream things, those are in the Red Hat registry, and those are things that are physically supported by Red Hat. We want to support things that are supported by Red Hat, not things that are open source and not supported by anybody, right? So our customers are looking for an end-to-end support contract. So until Red Hat 4.5 comes out, that'll have OPM 12. Whatever in it, and that'll be a much more, we have this window where we can't use those newer features of the tools until they become available in the Red Hat catalog.
I see. Yeah, okay. So I think I understand. I had thought, I feel like a lot of what I'm talking about was released in the scope of OpenShift 4.4. Maybe we should take this offline and see if we can find some support path that like doesn't break you. But yeah, I think I somewhat understand the scope of the problem.
Yeah, I've been talking to Evan and Sean about this for a couple of weeks now. We have a Monday interlock call.
Oh, okay.
And so far, I think Master just opened up just maybe a week ago. So the hope was that somebody could start working on something in this realm relatively quickly if there's no workaround. That's come up with a workaround for me.
We can't backport features though to 4.4 if it's not there, right?
No, but I think, well, I guess what I'm saying is I'm wondering, like, okay, OPM is not like specifically in the scope of a released version of OpenShift, right? Like, I'm wondering, like, what the actual support contract would be is around the registry image, which seems separate.
But I think that's where they're getting the binary from for the pipelines.
That's what serves the catalog, right? That's what people will use to serve the catalog. So they could use a different OPM version to make updates, but the OPM version that serves things out would be based on the one that we ship inside of the catalog, right? And I believe, I think if I remember from those calls, like we're also pulling out that binary to use for the additions and stuff. In this case, because we ship that binary, right? In that way.
I mean, for app registry, yes. For index images built outside, no, because the registry is packaged into the image. It depends what OPM they're using.
Yeah, so we're bridging a gap right now because we have to use 12.2 at least, right? Because that's the version that we've been all testing with, and we're happy with that. So we're kind of shipping in this half-supported mode. So we're using a version of OPM that doesn't ship with OpenShift, so that's not going to be supported by Red Hat. But that's the only version we could really get working with all the features we needed. So, and then Semver, I think there's Semver, the way that the indexes are built, won't work on 4.3 because the bundles are not in there anymore. And so there's an incompatibility between the APIs of OLM and then the indexes that are built with OPM.
Yep, that is true.
Yeah. So it's making it really interesting. So, but yeah, anyway, so moving forward, so 4.5 is coming out soon, right? So hopefully it's next month, right? If things don't slip. And hopefully the Semver skip patch mode will be there. So I'm definitely willing to entertain an option to preserve the default the default channel based on Semver if all that stuff works. So if someone can give us a way out there, that'd be awesome. Otherwise, we need this feature. That's the bottom line.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think I understand the scope of the problem. And yeah, like I said, we're definitely like actively thinking about this and other features very similar to it. So I think that's stuff we're working on. So hopefully we can try to find something that works for everybody.
Awesome.
Okay.
So,
does anyone have anything else?
So just a quick question. So this SIG forum is kind of to discuss features. I think some people wanted to use this for triage for bugs and things like that too. I know a lot of the details and the architecture is done behind the scenes by the Red Hat team, your team. And so this platform, is this mostly just to clarify how these things are working or to help guide the priority?
So there is an enhancements repo for the operator framework project. It's a GitHub operator framework /enhancements. And anytime we are going into a new, delivery cycle, right? We're, preparing for 4.5, 4.6, whatever. We start throwing enhancements in there, and anybody's allowed to comment them and drive like the direction of the product. So that's probably like the best entry point for people to, influence design decisions before we start investing engineering hours into them.
Okay, so I was asked to create it as an issue first, which I did, so we could discuss it. So now I think what you're asking me is to submit a PR for an enhancement request with basically this information in it.
I think the enhancement should probably have the solution that we would be implementing. So it would say, like, it would be like, this is the field that we're gonna change. This is how we would save it. This would be the UX of the OPM command around using that. These are the technical things that we would do, and then we would, I think we would we would agree on the scope of that work, and then we would merge the enhancement, and then the work would be done on that. And obviously, we do have like. What we probably need to do, Chris, is we need to publish the windows of time where we can accept these changes. We're working on a way to accept these changes over like a longer period of time. And it's a split that the Red Hat team has to do with some of the downstream stuff versus the upstream stuff. And it's part of the move to like CNCF and everything else. So that will be coming, and that will help the window with which we can merge things, but we probably do need to explain that window of merging, and we should come back to you on that. But that would be how I would imagine this working, right? Like the enhancement is the solution.
I'm still a little confused because, all right, so this is an RFE idea I had, and so the idea, it looks like it's getting tabled because there might be a better way to do it. I am not the expert on what that better way is, because it sounded like Kevin wanted to go back and talk to the internal team to discuss what that internal behavior would be. So it means I can't create the enhancement request because only you have that knowledge. And so are you guys going to create an enhancement request for that and have me review it?
100%. That should be how this happens. Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you are not, or if you are asking us to take this RFE and go and work on it and create the enhancement, then that's how. The other side of this would be if somebody on your team already had an idea, or somebody in the community who already had an idea of how to solve this problem, they could submit an RFE, and we could say, oh yeah, like this makes sense, and we would want to accept those changes. going forward. And I think that would then fall into the windows that I was just referring to.
Yeah, well, I think one of the other goals that we sort of stated, so this is only the second meeting of this working group for everyone who's not already super aware. I think one of the other goals that we have coming out of this working group is we're definitely looking for upstream contributors to the project. And so like, I think this meeting in general is partially just to be a place where people who are looking to contribute or interested in contributing want to talk about like specific implementation or questions around like how does this work in OLM or how does this work in the operator registry, so that if they were to go and write up an enhancement, or if they were to go like try to find a PR that they wanted to read, or even if they want to go and create their own PR and say, hey, what do I need to do to get this pushed along? Like all sorts of things like that are also definitely on the table for this meeting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that. Just if I'm going to do a PR for this one, it would be flipping a switch in a database. That's how simple it would be, right? Because I know what the database looks like, but clearly you guys have some other things that I'm unaware of that you want to do from a larger scale. So there's no way I can know what you guys are all thinking in there. So being an upstream committer is really hard unless as committers we're in these other meetings. I
totally agree. I think we would like to change that. And so this is definitely like super valuable feedback. I think what we want to do is we want to make the enhancements repository like the source of truth of like, hey, here is what is going to be worked on, not just like right before we work on it, but also like here is the long-term focus and direction of the product, so that anybody who's interested in contributing can see like, hey, well, this is how this thing should work. I think that bringing stuff up like that, like saying like, oh, I want to make this change in the product, like this is how I think it should work, should also be in scope for this meeting as well. If that's helpful. But I think part of it is we're still trying to find out exactly how that's all going to work and what that feels like. So if you have thoughts, or if anybody else on the call has thoughts about how we should do that, we're definitely open to ideas and suggestions.
So for this particular issue, I'd appreciate it if you could put a note in there and give me suggestions on what I should do next to drive this through. Because I'm still a little confused, because I know we're maybe a pilot of how you want to try this, and we can see how it goes forward. Because I've created an enhancement request before, and right now I'm kind of sitting on one of them, having to do with the curated catalog stuff. But I just needed. This is such a simple one. I don't want this one to span out over months.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I was going to mention, is that I think the scope of this request is relatively small, and it might be just a thing we hash out in the Git issues and go ahead and do. I think you're bringing up a larger point, which is that we set up this working group to try and get more communication going, but then we have lots of discussions that are not open to the public, and dozens of hours over the past 2 weeks discussing how we will be writing enhancements. So I think that that's probably like a really straightforward thing that we could do. Anything that is not Red Hat or OpenShift specific and design is a design discussion, is something that we could probably communicate out on the mailing list, set up an open meeting for. I know some other SIGs do like working groups for particular features, and so that could be a way that we go forward in doing that. But what I'm hearing is that you don't have all the context you want or need, and you don't even have a way to get it. So I think that that's a pretty big gap.
Yeah, exactly. So this meeting's like one hour every 2 weeks, or now once a month, right? So that's nowhere near time to be able to dive into deep architectural design issues, right? So we definitely need another avenue to talk about exactly what you said.
Lisa, you had a question? I know Kevin, Sean, or Alex, do you guys have any opinions on sort of migrating to do more things like that?
No, I absolutely think we should drive that. I think that's a great suggestion. I think that will allow us to get individuals like Chris who are deeply invested in OLM, much greater technical insights into it, and we can drive our community forward, because that's ultimately why we're making all these efforts, right? It's to open OLM up and get everybody in that we can, and get them all to a point where they can contribute technical discussions that we might not have otherwise.
Perfect. So you guys are going to take a to-do to try to figure out how to get something like that started?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right. So the next one, I think, on the list, Alex, do you want to share your screen again?
Kevin's going to do it, because I've been having to accept people as they want to join for some reason.
Yeah. So this is the one on OLM. Let me share my screen.
I'll do that the third time. I'll get my screen permission.
Okay. Let me know when you guys can see it.
I can see it.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to talk to this one a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So as I had mentioned before, we're using the automatic Z-build channel taxonomy, right? So there's continuous, which is like the typical stable, beta, alpha, fast, those kinds of things. We're using our customers are really particular about what versions they install and when, right? So we've tackled air gap, which I'll talk about some other time if you're interested in that. We're also, they want to know exactly what versions are going on, when they're going on, and what versions have physically been tested by somebody. So as you can imagine, right, when you have potentially a dozen products all interwired together as operators, there's a lot of, the matrix of combinations is extremely complex, right? It's nearly infinite once you start getting up there. It just goes up exponentially. And so the problem we're having is that when you from an inception perspective, right? So when you install some operator which has dependencies on other GVK APIs, which have other dependencies on GVK APIs, all the subscriptions that are built in that framework are all the default channel subscriptions. And so there is no guarantee that you're going to get the channel that you really wanted, or the version of the thing that you really wanted. So originally my thought was, okay, so there's this new feature coming in that's going to allow you to pick an operator version. And so the operator version, so that's that dependencies.yaml, of which you're allowed to specify essentially a semver range of an operator that you want to pick. Yeah, so that's kind of what you have here. The problem is that semver, in our case, that might work because we are using semver channels. So it could pick the right channel because that semver operator would only exist in one channel. But there is this case in the middle of the screen, top screen, where there are some use cases where we do want a combo, where we want semver channels, but we also, within that semver channel, we want the continuous option, or I think Evan was calling it a frequency option. So in the v1.0 channel, maybe that'd be our dev channel. We just spit out every single version we come out there, and then we have a stable one, and then maybe in version 1.1 we have fast stable, and now we have a long-term service release. And so we want to make sure that the versions of everything we're picking are somehow describable in a consistent way, rather than this latest always way or this other way that they're not expecting. So my original thought was, okay, what if we just establish the channel in there? So we'll have a channel restriction, just like we have a version restriction. And then later on, I think, I'm not sure who came up with it. It might have been Evan who came up and said, what if we categorize channels in a different way? So we know what channel, if we know the taxonomy of channels are really semver kinds of channels, or if we know they're continuous kinds of, or frequency kinds of channels, then we can at least kind of weight them and order them based on those rules. So that's kind of where he came about at the kind of a counter argument towards the end, because he's concerned that I think maybe in here he's talking about that.
Maybe if you scroll up a little bit. Yeah. So let's see here. So yeah, so in the bullets right in the middle of the screen, he talks about release frequency and version selection. So the idea would be that you would, I'm not sure if you would hardwire these at the moment, but let's say they're hardwired to words like stable, fast, dev, LTS, and you'd have some kind of weighting that says, oh, okay, if you've got this word inside your channel name, then that's going to have a higher weight than one that doesn't, right? So stable would have a higher weight than fast if the version range specified was compatible with that. So I'm kind of wondering if you guys have thought about this problem, because we are starting to run into it big time as we're trying to orchestrate the combination of all of the operator instances. Another thing that we want to talk about, which is what Mike was going to be here, is we've built this other thing called Operand Lifecycle Manager, ODLM, and that is a layer on top of it, which does let us, to some degree, come up with that slice of all these compatible versions. But it'd be really nice if we could model it, in the core OLM somehow. I guess you understand the problem.
Yeah, so I definitely, I think we definitely follow the problem. This is actually something that I have been having conversations with a bunch of different people over the last several weeks, because I think that there's definitely a lot here. If it helps, I can once again try to give a little bit of context into some like historical information. So
I get the historical parts because I've been watching OLM for over a year.
Okay.
And so before bundles came out, we've been using the Quay way of doing stuff. I actually took apart Courier to figure out how that thing worked. And so, yeah, we've been looking at it for quite some time. And so I think I have the historical aspects of it.
Mhm.
And so I get that. That's like baggage.
Sure.
So I'm more
Yeah.
interested in the future stuff.
Yeah, well, I just mean in terms of what we have today in the current open enhancement around dependencies, it's itself is more concerned with the way we're going to actually do resolution than it is with like the model with which we define dependencies. So I think we kind of like scoped ourselves outside of that problem just to like give us a runway to get started in like developing a new resolver. So what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks is we've been trying to talk a lot about what it means to define a dependency and how that works in the context of like our current channel model. I think Evan's on the call, and he will probably also have a whole bunch of opinions about this. But I think part of it is that just the channel concept in its inception was not intended to be this very generic thing that the sort of if you go and look at a bunch of operator packages, everybody's got their own idea of how to write channels and what channels they're supposed to be defining and what they're used for. And I mean, just looking at your example up here of like all of these different channel types, there's a lot of information encoded here, and I think it's hard for OLM to make decisions about what should and shouldn't be installed when you have that level of complexity all defined into like a pretty narrow scope of a problem.
It would be a good idea. So building on what Evan was talking about in this, if it would be a good idea to encode patterns inside the channel taxonomy rather than having them just be labels, right? So if we had at least, the three, which you guys, you kind of spearheaded with the, the Sember channels with the automatic Z build, the continuous or the frequency ones, and then this hybrid, right? So if we had at least a way to encode a couple of well-known patterns, then it gives you a lot more flexibility to be able to infer the desired outcomes.
So I actually I want to take it one step further than that, which is, what would the world look like in which the channel itself was not explicitly the method with which you build your update graph, but instead,
exactly.
Instead each individual bundle was almost like an object that had a set of labels attached to it, and that those labels could themselves be used to drive resolution itself. If that makes some sense. So
Yeah, so in this
right,
case, the channels are automatic in that sense, right?
right. Like you basically, like if you put no labels whatsoever, then you just have one quote unquote channel, and that channel is just like the ordered versioning scheme. And then on top of that, you could do something like label specific versions with like a stable label, and then you could modify your subscription or operator object or what have you with only get updates from thing with label stable. And then similarly, like you could also define your updates as like a version range of, I want to only get updates from anything in 1.1.z. And then at that point, it's not really a matter of the operator author necessarily even defining those things all the time. Like I think some of that is still somewhat up to the cluster administrator, right? And certainly the operator author could be the one who defines some sane defaulting mechanism so that, somebody who just wants to DNF install their operator can just do that. But it's like I think that's certainly a path we've been thinking about somewhat. I think that there's definitely still a bunch of discussion that needs to go into figuring out exactly what that looks like. So I guess the other question is, like, in the much shorter term, what would what would you guys need in order to basically get somewhere so you're not blocked from using some feature?
Yeah, once you slow down, I guess I can't remember where I left off on this one. I think the dependency mechanism that's coming is going to allow us to pick the right default channel as long as we don't have any overlap. So as long as we elect not to use continuous semantics, to mix continuous semantics and semver semantics in channel taxonomy, I think we're okay with the new, this new version dependency mechanism. So that gives us much more control over what we get. That's assuming that it can pick a different channel than the default channel. I think if I read it right, it looks like it does.
Yeah, I believe the way that it works is that it's going to prefer the default channel. But if the only resolution is to a package that's not in the default channel, it will choose outside of that. I think that's how the enhancement is written anyway.
Yeah, so the only time we'd have a problem is if we had like a V1 channel and a V1.0.1 channel, right? And so you'd had a overlap, right? Then you'd have to choose the default if one of them was a default. So I think maybe we need to have like a spin-off, like you were suggesting before, a work group to talk about dependency management in general. Because I really love the idea of being able to specify at the package level what your channel taxonomy should be, which prevents rogue channels from being created, right, within the scope of that package. So you'd basically have a package concept that's more formal. And then you would describe, what my channel taxonomy should look like, and then the rules for that. Like it could be plugins or something like that that define how you actually wanted to, how you wanted those channels to work.
Yeah, I think that definitely, like, we trying to figure out exactly what that would look like is something that we've been discussing for a lot. I don't know that we've totally pinned down exactly like what the perfect UX is. So yeah, maybe that is a good suggestion. Like, could what do folks think about that? Like, would people be interested in having an open forum sort of planning conversation around dependency resolution and what that would look like in the future?
What would be a good
Yeah,
place to start that conversation? Would it be, do we think that the enhancement proposal that we have today is a good place to start with, and we just need to maybe set a doodle on the mailing list and get a time that works for the most people and set up that call? Or is it, does someone need to take an action item to maybe write down something to get the context for the conversation? Or that would be my question.
To me, it feels like we need to, to me, that the enhancement as it is, that's currently merged, is sort of more limited in scope. And so I think what I would probably like to see is maybe either some straw man design, or at least some more detail around like where we think dependency resolution needs to go, and like what are some of the problems associated with it. And maybe once we have a doc, or maybe just a Google Doc somewhere or whatever, then we can create a meeting from that.
I could imagine that we could even start a thread that we might not need a doc potentially if we're just going to be getting a bunch of ideas down. Maybe having people who have thoughts start a thread that we can all kind of start a discussion on, and we can take the discussion and put it into a doc. I don't know if starting from a doc implies that one person is going to, in my mind, implies that one person is going to sit down and like write down all of the things. And I'm wondering if we maybe need to even have like a conversation before we can even sit down and write the starting spot doc. I don't know.
That's fair. Yeah.
Just a question. Like, yeah, I might be wrong. Maybe somebody feels like they can totally take a stab at it, and we can do it that way. I just asking the question.
Is there somebody else on the call who feels like they could take a stab at that rather than us just starting with a email thread?
I think we have a lot of prior art at different problems with our current approach and other approaches that it would be worth like consolidating all of that first, and maybe like getting down a lot of our internal thoughts, so that we like kind of bootstrap the conversation with that. But I don't think that should take too long to do. Maybe a day.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I wouldn't mind hunting those things down. So.
Yeah, Nick. I mean, do you want to start that process?
Yeah. I'll start that. Just where to post that after we're done is probably the best thing. Maybe it's good to put it in the Google group for this working group, and then have a thread there that we riff on it. It's like a Google Doc we can attack.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Agreed.
Cool.
Okay.
That's all I wanted to talk about with that one. I think the last one's mine too. I have a laundry list of stuff. So this one's all about operator groups. So we're having a problem because OLM allows you to specify basically one of 4 modes, right? And only 2 of them are really useful, in my opinion, is the cluster mode or all namespaces mode and the self namespace mode. The problem we have is now we've got all of these operators that are being built, and some of them are get installed in cluster mode, and some of them get installed in namespace mode, and they can't interoperate anymore. The constraint has broken it. So I'm wondering if any thought has been given to that particular problem.
An incredible amount of thought, like more thought than. So in fact, this morning.
Other than fixing Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, this morning we were just talking to two of the folks, Stefan Skamansky and David Eads, on the API server team about this very thing and expectations on operators. So we had some more, I guess you could call it progress with getting their thoughts. But I don't think we're near a solution. But I think, I don't know, Evan, do you have any ideas on how we can involve the community in these discussions in a way that's useful to them and us?
It's a good question. I think I would maybe just start by summarizing the conversation we had this morning as just a couple of bullets, which is the API server, the upstream Kubernetes API server position on this problem is that essentially all operators should be written as all namespace operators, so that there's no concern about mismatched scope. And if you need some degree of tenancy based on that, that should be something provided by the operator. That's kind of like the current suggested state of the art from those folks. We also discussed essentially lots of potential futures where different features in Kubernetes might help alleviate the need for that, or make it so that you can build different scopes of things without operator groups. For example, the ability to list namespaces and only get the ones that you have access to, the ability to get a list of APIs that are available in a namespace and have that list of APIs be different between different namespaces based on what operators are installed. But those seem a little bit farther off and require a little more exploration. So my anticipation is that that process will be very similar to what we do here, and we would start some issue on upstream Kubernetes to just float an idea, turn that into a KEP if we get some bytes, and go from there. That's kind of what I see the process being.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed that that's what they said. I was going to start telling my teams to not use the all namespace operators and use the namespace scoped operators, because that gives us that multi-tenancy, and our customers, the whole point that they're seeing in clusters is to be able to get some cost savings. They're not getting that yet at all, because a lot of our operators and workloads just aren't written very cloud native yet, right? They're all getting smarter about getting CPU and memory settings in their pods the right way and all that kind of stuff. But multi-tenancy is kind of like a real driving factor moving forward. And so it seems like if everything was namespace, other than the obviously the CRD problem, that seems to give us the most bang for our buck, having a self namespace mode for all of our operators.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say, you get a limited type of tenancy with that, but the problems with managing a set of operators over time that way are vast. And there are tons of UX concerns. And I have tons of docs on this that I don't know if we are going to gussy up and share or not, but we have discussed maybe like perhaps there's a way to provide a better multi-tenant solution on Kubernetes itself while sharing the same like underlying resources, in terms of like the scheduler, etc., and kind of separating these two things out so that you get that tighter multi-tenancy on cluster while not making it the problem of like OLM to particularly expose that on the APIs and to those operators, so like they don't have to be worried about clotting with each other. Evan, sorry, I cut you off.
No, I mean, I think that those are good things to point out. I was also going to point out that having a shared CRD between multiple instances of an operator, of single namespace operators, that really is the crux of the problem. I don't know how much experience any of the IBM teams have on updating a CRD over time, but you will have problems if you have multiple things that are sharing CRDs at different versions, for example. So we do some work in OLM to try and prevent you from losing data in those cases, but it's not easy by any means.
There's also the concern around conversion webhooks. One of those things would have to have the conversion webhook somewhere, and then you would be sharing data across that tendency, right? Like,
yeah, we're building this sample that we're planning on sharing with the world, I hope, that has all of this built into it, all the best practices and how you do that, because we're trying to get all of our workloads to follow this best practice. And that's with webhooks, that's with select, install groups, all that kind of install modes, using channel taxonomies and all that. The real problem I'm having is, yeah, it's just a lot of moving parts, and it gets so complicated because webhooks are really dangerous. So it really would be nice to have a pattern to have those suckers just automatic, and just have some boilerplate in a sandbox that you can't accidentally tank your cluster, and have cluster, read secrets and namespaces you shouldn't have access to, and all that kind of stuff. A lot of customers we have are getting really nervous about the amount of permissions that they have to be able to install this stuff. So basically, on all the stuff you said, I'm really leaning towards having operators and CRDs be as simple as possible, and delegating almost everything into the operand, because it's just too new and there's just too many moving parts. That's going to take potentially a year or more to kind of solidify. I don't know if I'm getting the right feedback or not, but we're at the top of the hour. I think we ran out of time, but
yeah, I'm kind of interested in what you mean by move the stuff to the operands, because first, I'm not sure quite which thing you mean by operand, and second, you're shifting the problem down from OLM, but you're going to run into the problem again there.
No, I know. I have a good answer right now. All I know is that we have our operands are typically legacy products, right? They've been around a long time. So they're solving all of these problems in non-Kubernetes ways, not non-cloud native ways. So they have ways of solving them. They're just not ideal. They're not very multi-tenancy. They're not very scalable and that kind of thing. So we have solutions. They're just not great. I don't want to solve them there, and it's definitely not a strategic way of solving them there. So I see the need to have something like OLM do that and push them into the operator if we can. But I think we need the concept of an operand layer as well that allows us to have at least two layers of coordination, right? That might help it. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, I guess.
Perhaps, like, I'm not quite with the terminology that you're using for operand. It's not quite there for me. But we could definitely talk more about this. Sorry to give you kind of a flaccid answer.
That's okay. So I think we've got three things that came out for me. So for this meeting and for this topic and the previous one, it seems like we need a thread probably to discuss it, right? Because I think we're gonna have to drive some stuff and collect you guys have a lot of internal notes on both of these topics, all three of them really. And so I think we need to bring them into these threads like you're talking about, and then figure out how we want to. We'll probably need little sub-SIGs or sub-feature groups to talk about them in more detail.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I thought I should mention, because you had mentioned it earlier. is that own namespace operator group inherently has privilege escalation problems. So if your operator deploys workloads to the same namespace, they have access to the service accounts that the operator does. Thus, it has the same permissions as the operator. Now, whether that's like important to you or not is another story, but that could be thought of as a problem.
Yeah, I get that too. Yep.
Yeah, I think the pattern that I kind of like is that you deploy the operators into a namespace and then they watch either the cluster or a different namespace. You also get some benefits like that. Like if you delete the namespace, I'll say like you delete a bunch of CRs and you go delete the namespace and they have finalizers, like you can't delete that namespace because you just killed the operator that clears the finalizers. So those resources just stay there and they don't die. Like there's some concerns with like own namespace and then like UX concerns around that as well. Just a heads up.
So you're advocating towards the single namespace versus own namespace mode.
I mean, I'm advocating, I think, for a large change in a lot of things, actually, by hiding it by the simple statement I just made. But no, I think this is a really good problem to start a thread on, like you were saying. So I think there's lots of different things to discuss when it comes to this. Like it's pretty much the UX of install an operator, right? Like that's what we're kind of, that's what it would boil down to in a lot of ways, right? Like when I install an operator, like what is the defaults of what I get? Like that's the question that I think we would need to answer before before we can make changes here. In my mind, at least, in my opinion, because like
exactly.
All of the complex scenarios are super important to nail, but like the default scenario is also important. And like, how do you collide these two things, right? Like, I think like this is where I think like we just need to start writing stuff down, getting a thread together, and then I think like you're probably right, Chris. Like, there's an entire subsig here of like lots of hard nitty-gritty problems of like hiding some of the decisions that the Qt API server has made around CRDs. So like I think like like, that would be my opinion at least.
I think this is all heavily dependent on the scoping conversation, what we do, and it could be that we even drop use cases for other solutions that solve those use cases separately. But we're like over time now. And my headset died.
I appreciate your thoughts, guys. It's been really helpful. Good productive conversation.
I know we just left it hanging out there that we're going to start some threads. Kush, do you want to start one of them, and maybe I can at least start the other one, or somebody else on the call can take that action item, just to make sure we don't drop the next step.
I'll start all the threads, and then you guys can go ahead and pile on.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'll start calling you out.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks to everybody who joined.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.